Yeah, you got a lot of people. You're recording in progress.
Yep. Yes, Frida will probably start here momentarily. And Bob.
Good morning, York East. Would you join me for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. So I'm not sure who was at the front desk this morning, but they're kind of invisible. So I'm going to do the 50-50 and announce our guests. So this morning we have our speaker, John Bailey, who will get a more formal introduction in a few minutes. We have a friend of his, Scott Wingard, and we have our Assistant Governor, David Corman, as well as our District Governor nominee, Aaron Jacobs, and we have our prospective member, Rusha Lee. So if you guys could all just stand up so everybody can see your lovely faces. And thank you for being here. And let's see here. I know John Bailey has a vested interest in this 50-50, so I'll ask Lou to pick a ticket.
Mine's take Bob.
All right, and the lucky number is 287. Okay, me who? Me, Nate. Okay, and I'm giving Nate all the ones so he can come back and play later.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, are we okay to move on to Happy Dollars?
I think so.
All righty. Anybody happy this morning? All right, there's not one happy soul in the room. Oh, Rusha's happy.
Thank you, Rusha.
Last week we watched the video safety, and I back home. I watched with my daughter.
Oh,
and she loved it.
nice.
And for the leadership local, Crystal, last week we have a graduation here.
Oh, nice, very nice.
That was another taste for me
Okay,
of local color.
good for you. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Chris, I think you're on.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Great job. All right. Announcements. I really don't have much this week, so I'm going to ask if anybody at the meeting has an announcement that they'd like to come to the podium with.
Come on up here, Diana.
Good morning. It's me again. We're about halfway to our dollar goal. So if you know anybody that wants to golf on June 16th or know any organizations that want to contribute as a sponsor, please give them a sponsorship form. I can send them to whoever you need. My next ask, I will be sending out a volunteer spreadsheet for the day of, whether it be setup, registration, even some help after the golf outing when we're giving out prizes and things like that. And then my last ask is if you work for a company that has swag, whether it be pens, Post-it notes, something that we can put in the goodie bags, please let me know so I can take a tally so that we have a good amount of items to give the golfers for the day of. That's all I have.
Excellent. I just want to add to that. The club has really stepped up with sponsorships. So thank you all who have registered as a sponsor, anything from Sand Trap to Masters. It's much, much appreciated. We're also are still looking for individual golfers, so make sure you get all your friends together. I just want to remind everybody that the golf tournament proceeds are the funds that cover our annual community grants and also our scholarships and RILA registration. So thank you very much. Let's see. Safety Town registration is still open until May 22nd. And this is also a great summer program that our club sponsors. Anybody else have an announcement?
Yes, Joanne would like to make an announcement.
Perfect.
Okay, I made the announcement last week, but I thought maybe some of you were not there at the meeting. But the Safety Town Committee is collecting funds, some cash. I was already given some money this morning so that we can purchase snacks for the children in Safety Town. In the past, we used to ask if you would purchase the snacks, but then we would have problems with dietary issues. So we'd rather take the cash, we'll go and buy it, and we buy snacks and water. So if you're going to make a donation, if you can give us the money by the beginning of June, and then we will go ahead and make the purchase. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. So Safety Town's coming along happily. We've got nurse coverage for the entire time, a young woman who is just finished her 3rd year of nursing school. So that seems like that'll work out. And I did want to announce, Chris, I just wanted to remind everybody about the Rotary Means Business event on July 30th. That's a Thursday evening. It will be held in York at the CGA Law Firm building from 5 to 7. And it is a nice way to network a little bit beyond our club, to meet other Rotarians, and also to invite folks who might be interested in Rotary or in the networking side of Rotary. So it is just kind of a meet and greet with hors d'oeuvres and beverages, and at some point in the evening, everybody gets to give their elevator speech. So it's happy to see it here in York, a convenient place for a lot of us, so please put that on your calendar if you can. Chris?
All right. Anybody else have an announcement? All right, looks like we got everybody covered. All right, last announcement from me is I think we have a really exciting program next Tuesday's meeting. Patrick Miller's topic is falconry, and I can tell you there will be at least 2 birds of prey will be here, safely secured. So it sounds really interesting. So I hope you can join us next week. We will be back at Heritage Hills, just not sure what room we're in. So watch your Sunday email. And that's all I have. So I think it's time to call Lou up to introduce John Bailey.
Last time I didn't put the mic on, so they didn't hear me at home. So I learned my lesson. So I'm really happy to introduce John Bailey, our speaker today. And the title of it is In Our Father's Footsteps, From Normandy to Nuremberg. Fred Bailey was a licensed mortician prior to entering the Army in 1941 at the age of 27 years old. Captain Fred Bailey never dreamed he would see or experience during World War II, which is why he always would tell the boys, war was too terrible to remember. From time to time, he would mention a thing or so about his time in the U.S. Army from 1941 to 1953. When John's father, Fred Bailey, passed away in 2005, his brother Jim found his U.S. Army 201 file with his travels during World War II and the issuance of a Bronze Star medal to Captain Fred J. Bailey. John and his brother started discussions of a trip to visit the places that their father had been in World War II after landing in Normandy via ship in early August 1944. In today's presentation, John will talk about his father, Fred, his mother, Malna, also a lieutenant in the Army, and his uncle Jack, a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. All three served their country in Europe. John will show his father's journey through Europe, from landing in Normandy to giving the order to begin the construction of the American cemetery at Margaret in Holland, and the burial of General Patton. John's father attended Nuremberg trials as a witness, and John will explain his duties after the trial was over. Fred's son, John, second generation family member of the Bailey family of companies, the original Bailey Travel, was founded by Fred's brother Glenn with his first trip to the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago via train from York, PA. After Fred returned from his country in Europe, and after World War II, Fred joined his brother in York and opened up their new venture, Bailey Travel Service, in 1949. John is a 45-year Rotarian at the Hanover Rotary Club and has worked in the family business, expanding it to include Bailey Coach Passenger Transportation, Bailey Zero Hazard Disinfecting Company, founded during COVID, Bailey Automotive Services, and Bailey Self-Storage. Let's give a warm welcome to John Bailey.
Morning. It's my pleasure to be here. It's nice to see some familiar faces that I've met through Rotary and business throughout the years. Lou and I have done a lot together through the Four Chaplains, and we visited from time to time. And he heard about my program, and I said I'd be more than happy to come and do it. So I'm actually going to give this to the Uptown Rotary Club tonight. What's going on? Here, do I need? Am I good?
Well, you're good, but the video, well, your slideshow is not going to be seen on Zoom.
Okay.
No.
Sorry. Okay. So anyhow, we termed this In Our Father's Footsteps. Once my brother and I kind of realized what Dad did, we thought we got to go to Europe. So we told our wives to stay home. You're not invited. And we took off and we went to Europe for 2 weeks. So this is Normandy Beach. I actually picked up a stick along the way, and my brother has much better handwriting than I do. So we wrote In Our Father's Footsteps in the sands of Normandy Beach, which he landed on. This is my father, Fred Bailey. He was in the 9th Army. He was originally in the 8th Army, and when he was sent to Europe, there was already a 9th Army, and the 9th Army was General Montgomery. So because of General Montgomery, they re-established the 9th Army, which was reactivated from World War I. Feel better if we do it here? Is that better? Still a little bit. So he served in the 9th Army, and it was deactivated after World War II. It hasn't been activated since then. Dad was awarded the Bronze Star. I'll talk a little bit about that. And we never knew that. When they were moving out of their house in Spring Grove, I saw this little case, and it had this in. And I said, my gosh, Dad, I said, you're a hero. He said, I'm not a hero. He said, I was just at the right place at the right time. He said, now Meeker, who's my uncle, he said, he's a real hero. And I'll talk about him a little bit later. These are my father's medals that he received for his service. These are reproductions. The original medals that he earned, he sent home to his sister in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And she passed away when he was overseas. Her husband sold all of his medals. He never had them. We never knew this until about a year before he passed away. I reordered the medals through Medals of America. I had his orders. I could tell where he went, what he did. I read them to him. And my brother and I got this made to give to my father, and he passed away 6 months before we could give it to him for Christmas. So that hung in my mother's study for 11 years after he died. And then now it hangs probably in my office in Spring Grove. When my father got drafted, he went in as a buck private, and he was put on a mule train. They didn't have a lot of mechanization back in those days. So he was put on a mule train. And this is one of the actual pictures he took in March of 1942. And he loved to take a lot of pictures. And I have some other photo books, his photo books over here, some other documentation, please take a look. You can pick up anything and look at anything you want except for the German Luger I have over there. I have an actual capture gun with documentation from a German World War II officer. So Dad went in and they actually were going to send him through Italy and Burma. And that's a howitzer they have on the mule. Somehow he ended up in supply. And then he wrote a letter to his commanding officer and said he had greater talents to give to his country. He wanted to go through OCS school. So Dad was a licensed mortician when he got drafted. He'd gone through mortuary school out in Detroit, Michigan. He lived out there with an older brother that he had. And he went through OCS school, came out as a lieutenant, and they put him in graves and registrations. And, you know, I also have a book that's written over there. It's the only book that was ever written in the history of the United States about graves and registrations. My father was mentioned in that book. But this talks about where he was company headquarters with the captain. So he was in charge of everybody down the line, and they would go out on the graveyard, on the battlefields and pick up the dead soldiers, not only the Americans and the Allied soldiers, but also the German soldiers, because the Germans just left their dead, and he would help establish graveyards. So they'd have a collecting squad, and he also told us that they would put grenades under our soldiers. So when we roll them over, the grenades would go off if they could kill more Americans. So they started using German prisoners to collect the dead. So they would go to a collecting station, then evacuation, division registration. They would gather all the personal effects, and then they'd have to ship all those personal effects home. They immediately get buried. And then after the war, Dad went back and worked for almost 4 years, and they were disinterring them, either putting them in permanent cemeteries, which are there today, or sending them back home to be reburied. So my brother and I started our trip. We flew to Paris, and then we took the train, and then rented a car. We ended up in Carrion, France. And this is where there were German submarine pens. So the Germans had here and Brest, where there are two big seaports that they had for submarine pens. And we had a twofold purpose. Dad told us about the Battle of Brest, and that was a very fierce battle that they had. And we wanted to see the submarine pens, and the ones in Brest aren't open. These are, they used prisoners to build this, Polish prisoners. And then the subs could come right out of here and go right out into the deep ocean. You can see how thick the walls are. From what they told us at the museum, they bombed those night after night, but because they were so thick, it didn't do any good. And this is one of like 5 buildings that were there, huge buildings. So then I want to talk a little bit about my mother, Melna Bailey. She's from Montgomery, Alabama. She went through 4 years University of Alabama and was a dietitian by trade, and she went in the medical corps, and she was shipped over to Europe, over to France, and she was nursing the soldiers back to health, being a dietitian, putting them on special diets, try to get them healthy, try to get them good enough to go home. Dad was setting up a mortuary at Mom's hospital in France, and Dad had access to the mortuary car. So Dad and his roommate asked Mom and her roommate to go out on a double date, and Dad took the car out into the country because there was no gas at that time after the war. And the girls were like, sure, we'd love to get out of the city of Paris, because they were tired of all the traffic and the people. And they went out on this picnic in the country. Dad went out with Mom's roommate. Mom went out with Dad's roommate, but till the day was over, they switched. Fortunately for me. So another reason we wanted to go to this area in France is this was my mother's secretary, and we had kept in touch with her for over 60 years, Denise Herbreau. We've been writing back and forth with her, sending family pictures. She never had any children. She had a small shrine of our family in her little apartment. And Jim and I, this is my brother Jim on the left, he served in the U.S. Army. And we had a wonderful lunch. I called my mother, and they must have talked for an hour and a half on the phone and cried like it was 1945. It was absolutely incredible. My brother and I wrote back and forth to Denise for probably 8 or 9 years after we visited her, and then the letter stopped coming, so we assumed she probably passed away. German cemetery in Levenson, France. We visited this. We know Dad established some of those. So, the American Army established these. There's the type of headstones they have, and that building in the back is a registrar. But you can go there, and they're maintained by the German government. We stopped at the American Britannia Cemetery. And again, some of these Dad worked at. We don't have actual documentation of this one, but just to give you an idea, 28 acres, 4,400 headstones, 498 MIAs, and 21 sets of brothers. Couldn't imagine having 21 sets of brothers in one cemetery. The way they're laid out, I'm sure some of you visited American cemeteries from down in Washington, D.C. to maybe Hawaii to over in Europe. Very beautiful. You either have the Star of David or the Christian Cross. We were told by our guide over there at the one cemetery that we visited that a lot of the Jewish soldiers registered as Christians because they were concerned if they got caught that they would shoot them right away. So there's a lot of Jewish that were buried as Christians. Everybody is buried as they fell. It didn't matter their rank, what they did, what their ethnic was. This is a Medal of Honor winner, and he was buried there. There's only one exception to that. All crosses face the west. Beautiful views from up at some of the buildings that they have. Then we went on to Cannes. Not certain if Dad was there, but we just thought we were there. We were going to hit that. This city, there was nothing left of it because we just bombed the heck out of it. And then I didn't realize the depth of 50 miles of our landing beaches that we had. And also from the time that we went in on June 6th, by June 11th, we put 300,000 troops in there, 54,000 vehicles, and 104,000 tons of supplies. Absolutely incredible feat. Then we went to the World War II Museum on Dwight Eisenhower Boulevard, and that sat on top of an old mine, which was the headquarters for the German army for France. So it's kind of ironic that they would build that on top of that. Then we went on to see a British Mulberry, where they brought in the big concrete floating harbors where they could unload. And that's a part of one that's left over out there. A big storm hit those like 2 weeks or a month after and sank most of them. There's a British landing craft that was left as a museum piece. Flags of appreciation everywhere. Everywhere we went, everybody loved the Americans, loved the British, loved the people that came and liberated them.
I hate this is
just that one. Then we went on to St. Mary-Glise. St. Mary-Glise was the first city in France that was liberated by the American Army, by the 82nd Airborne. So under the Geneva Convention, when they're coming down by parachute, the airborne guys, you're not supposed to shoot at them from the ground, but the Germans didn't care. They were shooting at them, and then also the Americans were shooting back. So those are actual bullet holes. Here is also a fence in the main square in St. Mary-Glise. You can see it took a bullet. And ironically enough, it's my brother Jim. The Romans were here, thousands of years, and they had those markers every mile all the way back to Rome. Absolutely amazing. I didn't realize that. Then in St. Mary-Glise, I'm sure most of you have seen the movie The Longest Day. And 82nd Airborne, when they came down, this is John Steele. He got caught with his parachute up on the spire of the church through the battle. He was taken prisoner. He was shot, taken prisoner, and then escaped. And he went back through, and he spoke to graduating classes for many years of the airborne troops. One of the churches we went past, we were just driving along. You can see a picture on the bottom of how that church was destroyed during the bombing and the war, and then what it was rebuilt like for today. Then we went to Utah Beach, and these are some of the gun emplacements. And Hitler had his Atlantic Wall. He really felt that, that was impenetrable, but he didn't realize the might of the Americans and the Allies. Well, again, one of the gun emplacements that's left over. Inside, they told us that they locked the soldiers, German soldiers, inside those, the commanding officers, and had to fight to the death. We were shelling them from the ocean. This is one of the craters, pretty big, but they also told us that the majority of those shells overshot the gun emplacements. This is the inside of one of the ceilings. I assume an American soldier went in there and they sprayed machine gun bullets. This is what the Germans had to look out of and see. And then also the cliffs that were climbed by the U.S. Army Rangers at Point de Hoc. You've probably seen that in the movies. Omaha Beach today, people are out there relaxing and enjoying. And I never realized, you know, we went in at low tide, and at high tide, it's probably a good 300 yards. So they had mines, they had, you know, tank defenses, they had all kinds of things that those soldiers were way out there, hundreds and hundreds of yards, and had to go in just to get to the point to where they could, you know, find where the Germans were. So I just didn't realize the distance that was there. Then we went to the Normandy American Cemetery, 172 acres, and this was the big cemetery that they made, where they brought a lot of the deceased soldiers. And this is the main one in Normandy. 9,000 headstones, 1,500 MIAs, and 45 sets of brothers. Unbelievable. If you're an MIA, they have a wall at every single cemetery, and they have the MIAs on there, because a lot of these people the battle was so severe, there was just nothing left of them. Many years later, sometimes they find the remnants of a deceased soldier, dog tags, maybe DNA, they identify them somehow, and they then put a rosette so they know that they were identified, and then they will either bury those remains in that cemetery or send them home, whatever the family wishes to do. Theodore Roosevelt, he died of a heart attack when he came off his ship not long into the landing. His brother Quentin was killed in World War I, and they brought him where he was buried in Luxembourg, and then brought him over and buried him next to his brother. And then, of course, it's overlooking Normandy Beach. Then we went on to the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten, Holland. Dad told us that, you know, this is where he worked the majority of his time, from 1021 to 49. That's what his orders state. And he said he had something to do with the building of the cemetery. So this is what he received his Bronze Star for. And I probably have that Bronze Star in a plaque and have it hanging in our office in downtown Spring Grove. Every day they have a Memorial Day service. And they do it on VE Day and Memorial Day. And local families have adopted these graves. And they're in third generation now of their families that come and bring flags, bring flowers. It's just absolutely amazing. Today, it's 65 acres, 8,000 headstones, 1,100 MIAs, and 40 sets of brothers. And again, I talked about the local families that adopted the graves. Frank LaHaye was a local guide and a Hollander, and he was our guide for the day and gave us a lot of information about the cemetery, about the founding of the cemetery. And also, we find in there that my father was noted in a book that was written called Crosses in the Wind, and I have a copy of that book over here. And it's the only book that was ever written about graves and registrations in World War ever from the American Army. So here I highlighted Bailey. And again, my father never knew this book was written. The man that wrote it was another captain that worked under my father. And they started to build the cemetery closer to the line, and they started getting shelled. The colonel shut it down, told my father to go out and find another place. Dad sent Showman out. Showman came back and said, Captain Bailey, I think we should establish this here. And they established the cemetery there. My father gave the order to begin the construction of the American Cemetery in Margraten, Holland. And then he oversaw all that construction. These are some of the bodies. These are actually out of my father's photo book, and I have photo books over there. You're welcome to look at those. It rained and rained and rained, and there was nothing but mud when we read the book. And you can go online and just type Crosses in the Wind by Showman, bring it up, you can read the book online. They actually had to go out into the forests and cut down logs, and they had to lash them together, then bring stone in on top of it to try to get a road system in there. This is what it looked like. Everything was dug by hand. So at the end of the war, this was the largest cemetery in the world for American and Allied soldiers. Had 17,000 American and Allied soldiers, and another section that was separate down at the bottom with German soldiers. This is the way it looked. So again, this was written in the book. The war was over. Captain Bailey wanted the entire company assembled for Memorial Day services in Margraten Cemetery. The main problem was getting enough flowers to cover the 17,000 graves. The day before the services, their 20 trucks that they used to haul the bodies collected flowers from 60 villages and brought them in piles to the cemetery. Nearly 200 men and women and children worked through the night, placing the wreaths and flowers on the graves. General Simpson, who was Dad's general, and 16 other generals representing the corps and divisions who were in attendance at that Memorial Day service in 1945. That service still continues today. So my brother and I had planned to take the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren back there to attend that Memorial Day service because my father ordered that. Unfortunately, my brother got sick 2 years ago and passed away. I told his daughters, some of the money you got from Dad, you better hold back because we're going over there with the kids and the grandkids and the great-grandchildren. So in a couple of years, we're going to go back over there, attend that Memorial Day service as a family in honor of my father. This is pictures from that service. Then we went to the Ardennes American Cemetery in Belgium. Beautiful. And believe it or not, some of you may know this guy, Mike Ishanik. So he was band director at Central High School. Or I'm sorry, he went through Central High School, went through the Air Force, and he ended up as the superintendent of the cemetery there. And here his wife worked as a secretary at the law office next door to our travel agency in downtown New York. And we used to pass each other in the parking lot. So you talk about a small world. That's his son, Mike Jr., and they were sending him off to Penn State. He was a senior that year. Small world. So this was really interesting. Clairvaux, Dad had visited there back in November of 1944, and that was a respite spot for the American and the Allies. It was near the front, and this is a letter that I found down in our basement in between a book when we were cleaning out some things. And this is the actual letter that my father wrote. It was postmarked February 7th, 1945. And he had, our snow was all gone, and we are now waiting for the rain to stop and the sun to shine. As usual with rain, King Mud is having a busy day. Some months ago, I sent you a picture of Clairvaux, a very beautiful town in Belgium, very near the border of Holland and Germany. The background is a forest where quite a scrap took place. It is a shame of the condition of that town today. I doubt it will ever be rebuilt. Does anybody have any idea what Clairvaux was? That was the first town that was bombed during Battle of the Bulge. So they sent Dad back there in February because they were still digging up the bodies that were frozen in the snow after the Battle of the Bulge and picking up the dead. This is what it looks like today. But to have that letter in my basement all those years and I never knew it, and then to be able to find it, what a gem. Then we went on to Bastogne. That's the largest monument. And 101st Airborne, they were surrounded. And then they had General McAuliffe, who said nuts to the Germans as far as surrendering. And who did they send in but old blood and guts, George Patton, to liberate those guys? Then we went to the Luxembourg American Cemetery, and Dad mentioned this to me a couple times. Has anybody ever been there? Okay, you've been there. And when you walk in, you see this at the front of the gate. And that's General Patton, where he was buried. So General Patton was originally buried with his men. As I told you, everybody, as they went down, didn't matter your rank or what you did, you were buried. So many men were coming day after day, and they were desecrating all the graves around General Patton's graves. They decided to move him. Dad was the one that disinterred him, re-prepared his body, and then buried him where he is today at the front of the cemetery. And I did ask Dad, I said, did you bury him with his pearl pistols on? He said, yes, I did. So they had his pearl pistols on. Then I want to talk about my Uncle Jack Meeker. Jack worked for the Standard Register Company here in York, built that building out here off of Mount Rose Avenue. And he really wasn't my uncle, but we didn't have any other relatives other than my dad's older brother in the area. And we did every holiday. They called my mom and dad aunt and uncle, and his mom and dad aunt and uncle. So this was taken at Guadalcanal. This is his helmet, which I actually have sitting over there. You're welcome to look at it. Please don't touch it. But he was in Patton's Army, Third Army, and he was crossing the Rhine River, and he was a lieutenant on a machine gun crew. He sent 2 men up to cross the Rhine to return fire to the Germans. They got shot. He sent 2 more men up. They got shot. They were trying to set up a 50 cal gun. He went down, set up the gun, started returning fire, and he told me this himself, that he looked to the right and he saw the silhouette of a German soldier, and all he saw was a muzzle flash. Now, Uncle Jack always had a big chunk missing out of the top of his ear. And the reason is that bullet went in the right-hand side of his helmet and came out the back end of his helmet, okay? And took his ear off, part of his ear, knocked him out. He got up. All of his men were gone and crossed the river, and he went in to a small village, and he was captured. Now you can see on the inside of the helmet, he has his name written, Meeker. He was awarded the Silver Star for what he did. We found where he was held prisoner, okay, POW camp in Heppenheim, Germany. And believe it or not, we went into town, and we asked somebody where there was an ex-prisoner of war camp. They told us we were a couple blocks away, walked down. This was a local German. We just met him. He was a retired teacher, and he was kind of our guide for the day. We had a good time, Gerhard Losen. This is the section where the Americans were held. So Uncle Jack was only held there for about 2 weeks, maybe 15 days. And he told us the only thing that they gave him to eat was bread made out of sawdust. So they put sawdust in to give you a little more substance in the bread, and potato peeling soup. And that's the only thing that he had to eat. So he said on Good Friday, 1945, when he woke up, they didn't hear any German speaking. So he went out and he looked around a little bit, and himself and another officer, and this was only for the officers. They didn't, if you were a non-officer, the Germans shot you. They didn't want to be bothered, but they wanted intelligence from the officers. So he woke up, didn't see Germans, didn't hear Germans. He went down front and he explained this to me. And when I walked into that place, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, knowing he'd stood there some 70 years before, and that he had been liberated from there. And he said he heard this equipment coming and men coming, and in pulls the Jeep. And of all people, gets out of a Jeep and comes up and puts his arm around him and says, "My God, Lieutenant, I can't believe the condition of you and your men," because all these men were coming out. And, you know, they hadn't eaten some in a month or longer. And he puts his arm around and he says, "What can I do for you?" And Uncle Jack says, "General, it sure would be nice to have bacon and eggs." And he said, after he made that statement, he said, "That's the dumbest damn thing I could ever say to a 4-star general." Now, he was from Michigan. I'm sorry, from Ohio. So he didn't know anything about General Simpson, other than he was a general. And General Simpson looked at his colonel, his assistant, and he says, "How about we have all these men," which is about 230 men, in Paris between white sheets with bacon and eggs for breakfast on Easter Sunday. So this is his colonel. I actually met his son at a bus convention up in Hershey, and we started talking about this, and I found out this is, the colonel says, "General, there's no way. All the men and equipment are heading towards Berlin. We can't get equipment in here and get men going back the other way." And he said, the general looked at him and said, "Make that an order," and walked away. And my uncle said that's when he realized the power of a general. He said later on that day, all this men and equipment started coming and they evacuated him, and he had bacon and eggs for breakfast. But for me, this is an actual, from the colonel's book, General Devers had signed this to him and gave it to him, so I got access to some of that. It's pretty cool. It was an insane asylum before it was a POW camp. So the Germans, when they wanted this, they lined up all the insane people and they shot 200 of them and then buried them, and there's a cemetery out back. They usually had them in mass graves, but now they have an actual cemetery. Germans were just terrible. Then we went to Nuremberg. And the reason we went to Nuremberg is Dad was sent as a witness to sit for the last couple of weeks of the Nuremberg trials. Now, when Dad went back, went back for 4 years to help disinter and then put him in permanent cemeteries or send him home. And they sent him there because he had graves and registrations experience. So we went into Nuremberg to courtroom 600. And this is where they had the trials from November 20th to October 1st. So I was in Jamestown, New York a couple of years ago. General Jackson, or Judge Jackson that oversaw the Nuremberg trials, he was from there. I visited his museum. They gave me access to his personal photos. And you talk about being lucky. So this is from his personal photographer. These are unpublished. You don't really see these anywhere. Those are the Nazis being put on trial. This is where they were held in their cells. Anybody know who that is? Hermann Goering. So Goering told everybody, I will never see the hangman. I'll never see the hangman. So what happened the night before they were to be hung? Anybody remember? Committed suicide. So they always said that they brought a cyanide tablet in his briefcase to him. Dad said that's not true. I said, well, how do you know that? And I'll explain that in a minute. He was a pretty heavy guy, looks thinner in that one, but he said he had some kind of flap sewed over his belly button and had a cyanide tablet in there. And he took the cyanide tablet, committed suicide. And who do you think they called on to come and take the body out of the cell? Captain Bailey, because he had to pronounce him dead. Graves and registrations pronounced him dead. The next day they hung the Nazis and they hung Goering. Even though he was dead, they hung him anyhow. They said they weren't going to let him escape the hangman. So then they took the bodies down to Munich. And who do you think they gave the bodies to? Captain Bailey. So Dad was responsible for taking them down, cremating them, and disposing of their ashes in the Izor River. Now, Dad told me 40 years ago that he disposed of or 50 years ago, he disposed of those ashes in the Izor River. That was never really an encyclopedia or anything like that. But if you Google it today, it'll tell you the bodies were just, because they wanted to become martyrs, that they put the ashes in the Izor River. So this is the gate of the Dachau camp. Said that's the most photographed gate in the world. This is what it looked like. And Dad went in and helped liberate a lot of these POW camps. So they were terrible because they needed the graves and registration guys because there were so many dead or dying people. These are the ovens. So this is what Dad, and we don't know if he cremated them there or he went to like a public crematorium in Munich. But this is what they would find when they were going into the POW camps. Just terrible. Price of war, showing how many dead there were in World War II, 201,000. This is what my brother and I did in 2014, 5 countries. So traveled 12,000 miles. And I really like this. Never let the memory of your father lay forgotten. He could never say die, and we'll always need men like him, General George Marshall. Just a very powerful statement. And God, I do trust, and I'm very glad to be an American. I'll be happy to answer any questions if we have time. So again, I have photo books over there, all original photos from my father's Instamatic of different things that are there. I have an actual capture German World War II Luger that I just purchased a couple of months ago, but it has actual documentation of when it was mailed back to the United States in the military mail. Hard to believe that. And then I have my Uncle Jack's helmet over there. So, and I didn't finish the story of how he got his helmet. And the liberation crew that came in, guys were coming in from everywhere. One of the guys in my uncle's platoon ended up there somehow when General Devers came in, and they had this huge room filled with equipment they took from the Americans. And he knew the lieutenant was shot in the head and survived. That was the only helmet they saw in there with the bullet hole. So he looked in and he had his name written in the back, which I showed you in that. And with his name in the back, he went and he got the helmet, went and found, he said, Lieutenant, I think you're going to want to keep this. So my Uncle Jack and my Auntie Ray, they lived in Spring Grove.
Entire life. We moved there because of them. They helped my father and mother find housing back in the early 50s. And I have the helmet because I'm going to donate it to the Historical Society. They're going to expand in Spring Grove into the old school building, the old junior high building in Spring Grove. And they're in the process of doing that. They're going to have a permanent display there, and this helmet will be there. There's also a newspaper article I have copies of about the story about my Uncle Jack that was written in the York Daily Record, and it documents what happened to him. You're welcome to take a copy of that if you'd like to take that. Okay, thank you. Yes, question. I don't think so, because as they died, they were buried. So that's what we were told as they fell. So one could have died one day and one 5 days later, and it could be 3 rows down. So it's hard to say. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right. John, thank you
Yes.
very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. I hope to see it someday in person. My husband is also a World War II buff, so we've visited many of the places that you've talked about, so I really enjoyed it. To thank you for your presentation, we have a children's book for you to choose from. That book will be donated to a children's library, either at Children's Aid Society or the YWCA. So, unless there's anything else for the good of the cause, I think we are ready to adjourn. There is a golf committee meeting following this meeting. So thank you all. We are adjourned.